Hello and welcome to the last Opera Holland Park online panel event before the opening of the season. This is probably the maddest week in the opera calendar. This time next week, Figaro, Susanna and the whole Almaviva household will be getting ready for a double wedding. For now, we're looking ahead to August and the company's first co-production with Charles Court Opera. Our subject this evening is The Pirates of Penzance. And with me are John Savournin, director and Pirate King. Hi, John.
Hello, Anna. Nice to see you.
And Yvonne Howard, who will be playing Ruth.
Good evening.
Unfortunately, Richard Burkhard is on stage at the moment, rehearsing as Faninal in Der Rosenkavalier. My other two guests here have both just raced back from their rehearsals. Hopefully, we will see Richard at some point. But to get us in the mood, let's journey back to last May with John's inimitable performance of the modern Major General's song, which was recorded for the OHP Online Open Day.
I am the very model of a modern Major General. I'm information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England and I quote fight historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical. I'm very well acquainted to his matters mathematical. I understand equations both the simple and quadratical. About my noble theorem, I'm teeming with a lot of news. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
I'm very good at integral and differential calculus. I know the scientific names of beings, animalculus. In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
I know a mythic history, King Arthur sets a paradox. I answer hard acrostics, have a pretty taste of paradox. I quoted energics, all the crimes of Heliogabalus, synchronics, I can floor peculiarities, parabolas. I can tell it out in Raphael's from Gerardo's and Zophanes. I know the croaking chorus from the frogs of Aristophanes. Then I can have a fugue which I've heard the music's dinner for. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore.
And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore.
Then I can write a washing bill in Babylonic cuneiform and tell you every detail of Coraticus's uniform. In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
In fact, when I know what is meant by Mamelon and Ravelin, when I can tell at sight a Mauser rifle from a javelin, when such affairs as sorties and surprises I'm more wary at, and when I know precisely what is meant by commissariat. When I have learned what progress has been made in modern gunnery, when I know more of tactics than a novice in a nunnery. In short, when I'm a smattering of elemental strategy. You'll say a better Major General has never sat at
You'll say a better Major General has never sat at You'll say a better Major General has never sat at You'll say a better Major General has never sat at
For my military knowledge to employ in adventuring is enemy were down to the beginning of the century, but still it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
But still it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
Well, bravo for that blast from the rather recent past, but it won't be John who's singing that song in production this summer. It will be Richard. John, could we start by looking at the plot? It's the second opera in the season that focuses on a sort of accident of birth or on a foundling. Frederick, Figaro, they've both ended up as infants in the wrong place. Please take it from there.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? It's a common feature of opera plots from time to time, isn't it? The swapping at birth, and actually, Gilbert uses it a lot in lots of his plots, along with the magic lozenge plot, which actually he rarely doesn't include as part of this. Essentially, the story concerns Frederick, who is a pirate, an apprentice pirate. He's been brought there by mistake by his nursemaid Ruth, who will of course be played by lovely Yvonne here. And he was born in leap year, so though he's come of age he believes that he's come of age to leave his indentures and go out into the free world, and he plans to leave and exterminate the pirates because he believes that they're morally corrupt. And this leads him to meet some young ladies for the first time, who and he falls in love with one of them, Mabel. The pirates arrive and attempt to capture those maidens, but their father, the major general, who has a lot of daughters, he plays on a ruse of being an orphan, which is something that these particular pirates are notorious for having a weak spot for, because they're orphans themselves and they know what it is, to quote the line. And this leads to the major general's deceit being uncovered, and Frederick, with a band of policemen, end up pursuing the pirates, and a battle of various of a certain sort of nature ensues, and it's all resolved by a sort of denouement that comes from Ruth herself, where she claims that the pirates are all noblemen who have gone wrong, and everybody says, "Oh well, that's all right then, and and the Major General says, we love our house of peers, please marry my daughters and everyone will live happily ever after." It's a bit like it's a little bit like an action movie meets comic opera, because of the pirates and the way that they storm the castle, and the sort of active parts of the story with the policemen and the conflict that's involved there. And it's packed with lots of wonderful bits of music, of the pastiching, lots of other opera, lots of references to Verdi and Puccini and so on. And it's, I think, one of his best.
Yes, I mean, I would actually wanted to ask you about the parody element. But first of all, sorry, can I just clear up? So Frederick believes that he's 21 years old. How old is he actually?
Well, yes, in the second half, the Pirate King and Ruth have come up with found a loophole, which, you know, you could debate whether it's a real one or not, but they tell him that because he was born in leap year, he's actually only reached his 5th birthday at this point, and so he won't reach his age for a very long time yet. In the script, actually, because it's obviously originally set in the 1800s, I think he says the birthday required to leave the pirate band won't be reached by him until 1940. So it's a good sort of 55, 60 years hence.
Wow. Okay, political incorrectness klaxon going up here. Am I correct in thinking that this is all to do with Ruth having misheard the directions, Yvonne?
I think it probably is.
Yes, it is.
It is, yes. And she's very convinced that she's right. But of course, how do you step down from such an enormous mistake when you actually don't want to lose him because you rather like him?
Yes. Now, Ruth, who misheard the word pilot as pirate, is she in love with Frederick, or just at a time of life what kind of anybody will do?
Bit of a mix, I think. I think she really does love him, and I think she probably or possibly holds a romantic candle toward him, even though she knows it's probably never going to happen. She still has this little dream, I think. I think we all have little times when we think, oh, he's so lovely. I know I'm old, but maybe he'll still like me. So I think there's a little bit of that going on, which I think she definitely is quite sweet on him.
John, where does Pirates fall in the Gilbert and Sullivan oeuvre? I mean, they were well established by this point, weren't they? But the premiere was in New York, I believe.
Yes, that's right. It's probably about a third of the way through their collaboration, writing 13, 14 pieces together. I think it's 14, including Thespis, which was lost. And it was written for New York, because previous to that there had been a lot of because the copyright, I believe it was only the copyright of a production is only held in the country that it was first premiered. So in America, bootleg productions of their operas were rife, and they were trying to find a way of getting around this issue, and so they thought, let's open it in America so that we can hold the copyright there. And at the same time, they had a rehearsed reading of the piece somewhere in England. I've forgotten exactly where. It might have been, I'm going to say Portsmouth, but I think that's probably wrong. And they tried to cover both bases. I'm not sure it quite worked. I think they still had, there were still productions of Pirates being produced in America, but you can feel the sense of wanting to just slightly tweak the aesthetic for a different audience, to the American audience in the writing, I think. And it was incredibly well received, of course, in both countries.
Yep, there's a lovely quote from Arthur Sullivan's diary, written presumably in the early hours of New Year's Day, but about the subject of New Year's Eve, 1879. Got to New York Club at 7:30 p.m. Bear in mind he had a very painful kidney stone at the time. 12 oysters and a glass of champagne, a little risky before going on stage. Went to the theatre, house crammed with the elite of New York. Went into the orchestra, more dead than alive, but got better when I took the stick in my hand. Fine reception, piece went marvellously well, grand success. And it's stayed so, hasn't it?
Very much so, and actually in America itself, it's always been extremely popular. And I know there was the very popular what is known as the Broadway Pirates that came out of the 20th century. I think it premiered at the Lincoln Center. People like Patricia Routledge and Kevin Kline starring, and so on. And it's essentially the piece still, but they've tweaked it, and the orchestration's been vamped up a bit and that kind of thing. But it's obviously one of the operas by the pair that has held America's heart, possibly because of the fact that it was originally produced there. I've not thought of that before, but it's certainly a theory.
Yeah, a sort of sense of ownership.
Perhaps.
Might otherwise seem to be sort of really quite exclusively British, I suppose. How did they end up doing this? I mean, Sullivan was a scholarship boy at the Royal Academy of Music. He was born in Lambeth, I think, and was a Chapel Royal chorister, or have I misremembered that? Later studied in Leipzig, ambitious to be a serious composer. I know that he conducted and premiered very well received work not far from me in the old Crystal Palace while it still stood. It seems like quite a strange journey to go from Leipzig seriousness to this.
Yes, I mean, and Sullivan, I'm always reminded that in the Buxton Opera House, which for a long time was home to the Gilbert and Sullivan Festival, and it does still visit there for a sort of a week-long residency every summer. In the Buxton Opera House, there are two plaques on either side of the stage. One of them says Shakespeare, the other one says Sullivan, and I think it says something about the country's view of Sullivan, at his time, as being absolutely one of the greats in England. They started their collaboration because, I believe I'm right in saying it's because Gilbert had penned a short one-act piece, Trial by Jury, which was their first. And I think it was D'Oyly Carte, who was the impresario who ultimately connected the two of them, thought that Sullivan might be an ideal pairing to write the music for it, and it was a curtain raiser essentially for a different piece. I think possibly an Offenbach.
I think you're right about the Offenbach.
Yeah, and after that, because it was so successful, I think there was a little bit of a hiatus. But then he asked them if they would pair to write a full length piece, and so on it went. And I know that the relationship was not always easy, and I think Sullivan often was frustrated that, as you say, that he wasn't able to write the sort of grand opera that he was gunning for. He would often poo-poo some of Gilbert's plot suggestions, including this sort of, magic lozenge plots, and saying, could we find something a little bit more serious or a bit more realistic, perhaps?
John, I have to stop you there, because it dazzled me the first time you said it. What is a magic lozenge? See, Yvonne's with me on this.
So something that will magically change the course of the story. For example, in The Sorcerer, which was their first long established full length piece that has actually survived the test of time. That in the story there is a magic potion which changes who you fall in love with, and the first person you meet after you've woken up is the person you fall in love with, which results in a story where people fall in love with the wrong people because they accidentally wake up in front of the wrong people.
I see. So I mean, this goes. You can find it in Wagner, and you can certainly find it in
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yes, exactly. So I think Sullivan, wished that he would err on something a little bit more kind of realistic and grounded in some sort of truth. And as time went on in that collaboration, he absolutely did. And the Yona the Guard is case in point as a piece that's borderline grand opera for certain, with a tragic ending. They didn't work often in the same room. Even Gilbert would write a libretto or a passage of libretto and post it to Sullivan, who would then feed back via letter. It was quite rare, I think, that they spent time in a room together and had a very kind of a real fusion in the relationship. And I think that it, in a way, the fact that Sullivan really wanted to write so much serious music, or certainly to write music that could be taken quite seriously, I think is part of the reason why it's all quite successful, because Gilbert is very witty in his writing, and also can be quite dry, and I think that there's something about the way that those two ambitions come together that makes them what they are. The fact that you can have the chorus of peers in Iolanthe walking on and singing, "Bow, bow, ye lower middle classes, bow, ye tradesmen, bow, ye masters, we are peers of higher station," which is obviously meant to be quite a satirical bit of writing on Gilbert's part. Then put with Sullivan's music, you can find yourself as a viewer and a listener almost drawing a tear, because it's so majestic and triumphant and sort of honest in a musical form, that there's sort of this layer upon layer thing that I think is why they've lasted so long.
Yvonne, what's it like to sing?
I was just thinking during that, actually, that the grand opera side sneaks into quite a few of the pieces in a way, because he's a fabulous melody writer. He writes beautifully for the various voices as well. Nothing's really ever too high or too low, so it sits comfortably also for diction. Because obviously when things go stratospherically high for a soprano, it's quite difficult for the words to be heard, and that just doesn't really occur in GNS, does it? It's, if you have a high section, it tends to be off a word. And often, I have to say, thankfully, it's the mezzo or the contralto who gets a big tune that's very romantic. And I mean, in Iolanthe, for instance, the Fairy Queen's aria is quite Wagnerian. And expansive and very touching. So certainly, when I was at school, I sang Mabel, believe it or not. Pardon?
Did you have to do Poor Wandering One?
I did. I wandered off. But it was just a joy to sing, because it was, obviously it needs singing well, but it can be sung by sort of good amateurs right up to the top notch singers, and everyone can give it a really good go and sing it well, because the melodies are good and the words are good actually as well. But so I think just certainly as I'm now moving into the contralto parts, they're a joy to sing actually, and you get the fun as well.
Yeah, just to go back to the sort of the billing that we gave this evening. So we've got parody and we've got patter songs. Just in terms of Pirates, the parody, we've got a Gounod waltz song, haven't we, in Poor Wandering One? What else is parodied? Which other composers or genres are parodied? And would Sullivan have expected the audience to recognise the sources?
Oh, it's a good point. Possibly, you may know more about this than us, Anna. But I always think that the Fredericks and Ruth's first duet is pretty. It's pretty Verdian, I would say, in the way it comes across. It's it's got a fantastic dramatic introductory passage. I would imagine that we might be expected to feel reminiscent of Policeman Barbara Seville with the coppers in Act 2, possibly. And I'm sure that there are many more very deliberate parodies in there.
Because just before we went live, we were talking about the whole Patterson thing, weren't we? And the earliest example I could think of was Bartolo's aria from Marriage of Figaro, and that's comfortably 20, 30 years before Rossini, and then you end up with something like the modern Major General song, where it's all about this super fast delivery. I mean, what's the technique there? I mean, do you have to sort of just, do you still breathe the legato but just move your mouth like crazy, or what? Yvonne, you have to teach this stuff. What would you?
Actually, I was teaching someone some today. So in fact, yes. I mean, it's very much about the breath, because you have to have a lot of breath in you to do it, because the sound comes out on the breath. So you need a really good tank up of air. And then actually, when I don't know if John would agree with this, but certainly when I've done any and when I've taught it, it's almost the less you move your mouth, but the more you move your tongue. The tongue and the teeth have to be so energized. Well, obviously you can't energize your teeth, but your tongue to energize against your teeth. Because if you try and enunciate like that, you just can't do it. It's light, it's quick, it's clean. Consonants have to be very quick and clean. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, I think it's about being quite economical, but with those things, doing only as much as you need to.
Because otherwise it just goes into a big noise and.
But also making sure that there is tone in the line. It's no good for it to be completely chopped up, because also you just won't fully understand it. So
you need that legato airflow, don't you? And and then you drop the consonants into the air almost.
Yeah.
And so in a way, the lighter it is, the better, because if you chop it, you get each word, but you don't get the sense of the sentence.
Exactly, and I think
that from beginning to end in one big long flow, really, and just dropping these quick, clean consonants in. I think actors have that phrase, don't they? The tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips, and it's very much that.
In fact, Bartolo's aria in the Mozart La Vendetta, in that fast section, there's a really good example of that, because the melody is quite important in us getting a sense of all of that, whilst also just letting the words sort of run on this silver line that just keeps going.
The melody is actually just dee da dee dum da dum da dum. I mean, nothing's going on there. It's all
it's all here.
I mean, would this then count as sort of English bel canto? Do you have to, because our consonants just go all over the place. They're sort of spluttery and wasteful.
Very wet T's, for instance. You just have to you have to make it tight and neat. Okay. And crisp, clean, but with long vowels, so then you get your legato. It's an amazing technique, and it's a fantastic discipline, actually. And sometimes I will give my students, particularly at the academy, I will give them something deliberately difficult like that to do, and they say, I'll never be able to do it. It happens in magic flute. Man sich sich in die Ohren. Man sich sich in die Ohren. If you trying man sich forget it. It just has to come out of you, and so it's a very, very fine discipline for all voices to master.
I mentioned earlier that this is a crazy week, and possibly the craziest of all weeks, because we've all got productions opening next week, haven't we? I think, John, when does your Iolanthe open?
Yes, so we have the Iolanthe, which is 16 months or so after it was supposed to open right at the start of the pandemic. I think it closed actually on the day that everything got locked down, which was our press night. And finally, it's going to get put in front of an audience as an opening night on Sunday at the Roman Open Air Theatre in St Albans, which is this beautiful amphitheatre in the open air. And apparently we're going to have very good weather for us as well. And we've got 2 shows of that on Sunday, and we've just been rehearsing it in the last couple of weeks.
Do you want to recite the box office number, because you're doing very, very good. And Yvonne, you're singing Madame Larina in Onegin. You open what, Wednesday?
We open on Thursday.
Thursday.
Dress rehearsal Monday, open on Thursday, yeah.
Of course, Richard is tied up on stage in Rose and Cavalier, which opens, I think, on Wednesday.
Isn't it wonderful that people are actually back on stage and we're doing it?
Yeah, I know. I was going to ask, how does it feel a year on, and suddenly the level of activity is actually exactly where it was in 2019? It's very, very...
We went from 0 to 100 in a day.
Yeah.
We really did. It was nothing for 14 months. And then, whoomp, straight back into full rehearsals, 120 mile an hour commutes, not a mile an hour, 120 mile a day commutes. But I've found it emotionally quite overwhelming, actually, just hearing live music and also just the bustle of having people around you is quite something. But it's the live music. We had our Sitzprobe yesterday, and I just wept the whole day. It was just, the orchestra started even just tuning up, and I just felt my heart just racing. And then yes, it's wonderful. And we're so lucky. My golly, those of us who are working are so lucky.
It's amazing what the last year has done to remind us that we must never take what we do for granted. It's going to be some very, those, as you say, Yvonne, those of us who are lucky enough to be going into doing something, it's going to be special moment after special moment, isn't it? It's going to really, and I think it will last for some time. This awareness, this renewed awareness that we do something that's very special for people, and that we're lucky to be able to be part of delivering some joy to those who will come, and who everyone. I think I said this at the start of the pandemic, that won't it be amazing when we are able to all either sit in an auditorium or stand on a stage together and do something again. And the first time that happens for any of us and for any audience members, it's going to feel like all of our Christmases 1,000 times over. The atmosphere can only be astonishing. So I can't wait.
And the audience plays an incredible part, doesn't it? Because I was very struck by that watching last summer's proms, that bodies change sound, and whatever that energy pull is of people being, there to be sung to, changes the singing. It's remarkable. Before we get to Magdalene, actually, I want to start exploring the idea of which is harder, tragedy or comedy. And I think it might be good to hear Yvonne at her most tragic, in her most tragic mode, singing Rosa Mamai's aria from Chilea's La Lesiana, Esser Madre e Inferno.
Fino quasi a morirne, indi che venne
The glorious Yvonne Howard there singing Rosa Mamai's aria. Yvonne, what is it like to go from playing these really, really heart-rending, tragic figures to playing comedy?
Personally, it's much harder to do the comedy.
I would absolutely agree.
Timing, pacing, every night will be different because you have a different audience, you feel different. And I think comedy is very underestimated. It's not just standing there doing silly things. It's so complex. Whereas passion and tragedy, you just open your heart and go for it.
You talk about the effect of a different audience. I mean, I'm curious about this. Is it to do with something as simple as when the laughter happens? I mean, do you have to be aware of that in your performances?
Partly, but it's the, as we were saying before, having a live audience gives you it slightly feeds you. There's an atmosphere. Some audiences are much more vocal than others, so you have to leave more time for pacing of that. But I think also just even the way you say something, especially when you have dialogue as well as singing, how you pace the dialogue can make it fall flat on its face or be hilarious. So I would personally say that comedy is much more difficult.
Yeah.
You agree, John?
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And I think, the interesting thing about the audience is you can find actually that one audience who found something fun and reacted one day, and it won't happen at all the next, and it won't because you did anything differently particularly, but just something in that moment just all aligned in such a way that it just happened to do it. And there's a certain amount you can do to obviously try to work the comedy so that you get that stable, but it ultimately comes down to how that audience, the relationship with that audience, and how it feels. And I certainly find you have to have a radar out to the room, and it has to reach every corner so that you can work out how it's playing and how it's feeling. And I think that's very difficult. It's very difficult to sustain that, I think. And I think that comedy is especially hard because it only really works when you find the truth in it in the end, and that's hard to find sometimes. It can take a long time to get that to really feel like it's sparkling and that the energy is right, the temperature of it is right, and that's and as you say, Yvonne, in tragedy, we all know exactly what it's like to feel emotional, and we can access that very easily. It's a different thing.
Just thinking back again to 2019, so Yvonne was singing Rosa Mamai. John, you were doubling up and making people double up as Sante in Il Segreto di Susanna. But at the same time, you were playing, I'm going to get this wrong, either horn or ribbing. One of the two.
It was horn.
It was horn, the duo of conspirators. Now, just thinking back to Ballo, you've got that ha, ha, ha stuff going on like that. And for somebody like me who's very much used to seeing you play a comic role, it was actually extremely disturbing to see you act a baddie. I mean, what is it like to play a really nasty person?
Gosh, fun, really, essentially, because it's you're accessing a very different energy that can be quite exciting to explore in lots of ways. It's quite there's something to really get your teeth into, I think. I think that it's just quite it's just quite thrilling to be able to sort of let yourself go in that way and explore a side of you that you don't normally get to explore. I think that's the main thing. And in Ballo, what's lovely about that scene in particular is that it's a very sinister scene because of the lightness of the music against what they're doing, and that connection there, that fusion of comic against uncomfortable, is extremely well managed, and was very well managed, particularly in Radula's production, of course.
It was truly disturbing, actually. Yvonne, have you been able to play wicked people?
Yes, and it's very challenging. And I think, again, possibly one of the most difficult things to play is somebody who's quite like you. Because you don't know where to take the drama. I mean, for instance, a character like Cenerentola, for instance, who's just a very ordinary, nice person. She's so like most of us. Where do you take her without making her boring? Whereas if you've got a sinister character, you can actually sometimes find a part of you that, we all have those thoughts that we think and we never say out loud. And we have a day when we just want everyone just to go away. And you can actually explore that side of yourself and dramatise that aspect of you that you would never normally show. But we all have a little bit of it in us, I think, or say most of us. And I really enjoyed it. Like John, it was a really interesting challenge to go somewhere dark that I would never normally get the opportunity to go to. Dramatically, and then that also, of course, informs your singing. So you sing it differently, you colour it differently, and it's all a really quite exciting challenge.
No filter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
But John, in particular, when you're singing and directing in a production, I mean, it's the sort of Clint Eastwood school of opera. How do you balance? I mean, how do you keep a check on yourself as well as the rest of the cast and the rest of the production?
It's a constant balancing act, and I think it's very useful to have other members of your production team that you really trust. So for Pirates, for example, I'm very pleased that we have David Halston with us as choreographer, because he's very experienced as both an associate director, revival director, and as a choreographer. And I think for me, I often find myself standing in the rehearsal room in scenes, but I'm also very acutely aware of exactly what's happening around and trying to check in with that, and sometimes just stepping out of the scene in order to take in what's happening. And sometimes it's important to ask somebody else to stand in your place and actually, in a sense, stand in for you while you can get a measure of how the scene is coming together. It helps if you know the piece absolutely inside out, back to front, because otherwise I think that would be quite a difficult thing to do. And then, of course, there does come a point where, as long as you're very clear about what you're wanting to achieve from, for yourself as well as everybody else, and that you can collaborate with someone else who can be your third eye to help you realize some of those needs, then I think it works. But it is very much a case of those two hats are constantly coming on and off like that, and you try to wear them both at once as much as you can.
So, gun to the head moment, if you had to choose between directing and singing.
Oh gosh, very difficult to do that, because they are very different hats, and I enjoy what they both have to offer too much to make that decision. I think that I really like having to use different parts of my brain in that way, and I'm very lucky to have been able to do that, sometimes separately, mostly separately, which is also good. And I wouldn't like to change that. I think it's I feel very lucky that I'm able to explore them.
Yvonne, okay, I'm going to do a devil's advocate point here. How does Sullivan stand up to Offenbach in your view?
Oh gosh, they're very different, but I think they're equally as good as each other. I've done a few Offenbach pieces, which I just absolutely adore doing. I think Offenbach's much more frilly, if that makes any sense. There's a sort of a frou-frou-ness to Offenbach, even in the serious moments, which whereas I think because it's so English, even more than British. It's so English. The Sullivan stuff. It's got there's I think Sullivan does dark more than Offenbach does. Offenbach is very much more. Offenbach's champagne, if you like, and I think Sullivan can be a little more on the dark red or maybe even a heavy beer. You know, there's an undertone to it that. I mean, I'm not belittling Offenbach at all because I adore it, but it's just I think it's very different. But they both have their very, very strong place within comedy.
Could we talk a little bit about, for want of a far nicer term, the old bag roles? We were talking about this a little bit before we went on there, but I mean, I suppose one of my criticisms as a not a GNS aficionado would be that I think that the soubrette sopranos are a bit too virginal, a bit too prim, whereas I think Katisha, Mad Margaret, and Ruth have got a bit more to them. Do you mind playing these roles, which like a role cast as Mad Margaret is not very right?
No, I don't mind at all, especially now that I'm sort of an age to. I think possibly if I'd been given them when I was about 25 or 30, I might have minded more. But now I think when you've got a bit of life under your belt, you can see where these women are really coming from. And as you say, they're actually very interesting characters because none of them are two-dimensional. They're all very three-dimensional.
They're often the most three-dimensional characters in the pieces, actually. I think Gilbert tried very much to shed light on their inner worth, if you like, and a sense of helping us really feel empathy for those characters. I think it's something that he came back to time and time again.
Well, they either have a past or they're really pretty hell-bent on having a future.
Yeah, they never give up, and they're not embittered old twisted hags at all. They're very interesting women, and they've got lots of zest and interest and scheming and cunning, and they're really using their wiles. It may be in a slightly comic way, but they're using their womanliness to get what they want as much as they can. Whereas the ingenues, I think they're quite often very two-dimensional, no matter how beautifully they're played, because the character depth isn't really there. So having done Mabel when I was a teenager, obviously I was a very different person then, but I loved it and I loved singing it, but getting into these like the Catishas and the Fairy Queens and now the Ruth, there's so much to find out about them, vocally and dramatically. And do they really mean that? Or do they mean that? There are some really good questions to be asked. And so no, I don't mind at all.
So your introduction was as Mabel. John, what was your first GNS role?
It was actually the judge in Trial by Jury when I was 11 in a youth production.
11?
Yeah.
That's very young.
Well, it was a youth production, so everyone was very young. Although actually, my sister was playing the plaintiff, and she was about double my height. She's 5 years older than me, and that was quite funny, I think, as I remember. And it was great fun. Very fond memories of those those teenage years doing a different production every summer, and getting to know the pieces really.
So bitten early. One of the pleasures that I've had this summer has been editing and reading a couple of lovely programme book articles for Pirates. We have one from George Hall about the whole background to the piracy of the publication and so forth, and one by Robert Thickness, which is about George Grossmith, who's a little bit of a hero of mine, and it gave me an excuse to reread George Grossmith and his brother Whedon's Diary of a Nobody, which has surely got to be one of the finest comic novels to have been written in the 19th century. I was wondering, do you think that, I'm assuming that you both read the novel,
Alas, no.
John, we've got to fix that. Okay, I'm not going to go for the next question, which was going to be: Are the Pooters the target audience for Gilbert and Sullivan, or are they potential subjects? So I will move swiftly on. And that is, what is the general target of the satires? Is it pomposity? Is it class? I mean, can you draw a specific thing that sort of links all the different, everything up to patience or whatever?
It's certainly different parts of society, and also social behaviours in general, I think. I mean, there is an element that always there's often the butt of it is often the aristocracy in some way, and he really takes them to task in a piece like Iolanthe, for example, and in Pinafore as well. He very much mocks W.H. Smith, who was a real First Lord of the Admiralty, and mocks the fact that he'd never been to sea and things like that. It was Sir Joseph Porter never actually having gone to sea himself, but somehow is the ruler of the Queen's Navy, and he takes law enforcement, well, not law enforcement exactly, but the law and those who work particularly in the courts and so on to task quite a lot, partially because of his own interest in law and his own position in that respect. And he does a really neat thing in the Mikado of making English society the butt of that satire, and showing up how we react to certain situations in wonderful situational comedies, which is all these pieces really are in a true sense of the word. They're situations in which characters find themselves, which happen to create some really, really fantastic comedy if you find this. And I think that's what makes them work. Yes, it's quite a range there, I think. But the broadest thing that comes to mind is to say he takes society and makes us look at it, and it's almost as if he's got his own commentary running across the top, saying, "Look at what I'm saying about this, everybody." His extra voice is very present all the time.
Would that he were here now.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine what he'd have come up with? Yeah.
I was just thinking back to what you said about Buxton Opera House, and I was wondering how offended he might be to see the composer ranked next to Shakespeare rather than the lyricist.
Well, and he, of course, Sullivan was knighted quite a while before Gilbert was, as well, and I think that will have been something that may or may not have bothered him. I don't know. And he came from a different background of writing for newspapers, writing bad ballads, essentially these poems for newspapers and articles and things like that, and also writing a lot of pantomimes and pieces like that. So his his path was quite different, but also he's responsible for so many things that we forget. I mean, he was one of the first proper people to stand up and be a stage director rather than it be left to the performers and the stage masters to organise it. Sorry?
And quite a Tartar.
Oh yes, yeah, and he he did blocking literally with blocks, where he put the characters on his table and worked out exactly what everybody's going to do in advance and so on, and came in and really took people to task on things and didn't wish for people to deviate too far from things, and kept quite a tight ship. There's a wonderful little anecdote about somebody saying, "Oh, I would love to say this at this point, or do this gesture or this motion," and he said, "No, I don't approve." And they said, "Oh, but surely it will just get a laugh." And he said, "Well, so you would if you sat on a pork pie, but it wouldn't be funny." He knew what he knew how to he knew how to keep a disciplined cast, which of course is, you know, the big thing about comedy, full stop.
Absolutely. We've had a nice comment in here from one of our members and supporters, Charles Morgan, who says, an indication of the abiding hold that GNS or Pirates has on the American audience might be the Randy Rainbow Stable Genius parody of the Major General Patterson. Quite so. And that brings me to a little quick-fire questions for John and, well, actually, Yvonne, if you want to come in on this, what could you give us some definitions here? Hypotenuse. Fingers on the buzzers.
Oh. It's an angle of a triangle, isn't it?
Yes, the longest side of a right angle triangle. I'm using the VNA, not the VNA, the GNS archive here. Caractacus's uniform.
Oh yes, now Caractacus's uniform. Gosh, now that is something that's just escaping me now. Oh, that's so frustrating.
Little more than a loincloth.
Yes, exactly.
Ah.
Okay.
Yes. So to know every detail of Caractacus's uniform is absurd because there isn't any.
Is to know nothing.
Exactly. Perfect. And binomial theorem.
Oh gosh, you've caught me short there.
Singers and science, it caught me short too. The definition is a formula for finding any power of a binomial, which is two terms connected by plus or minus without having to multiply it out at length. Well, thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for binomial.
I'm so glad I know that.
I think this would be a good time to cut back to the second half of John's film with Richard Harker from last year's Open Day, and hear the model of the modern Major General again. I believe that you can click through to the lyrics and click through to the score. It's just underneath the screen in which we're sitting in a little box. The lovely thing about this is that you'll also get to see Sarah, Ben, Chloe, Pete, Hannah, Jake, Rose, Rob, Caroline, Guy, Lottie, Lee, and Naomi from the fabulous OHP chorus.
I am the very model of a modern Major General. I'm information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England and I point to fight historical, from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical. I'm very well acquainted too with matters mathematical. I understand equations both the simple and quadratical. About my noble theorem, I'm teeming with a lot of news. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
I'm very good at integral and differential calculus. I know the scientific names of beings, animalculus. In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
I know a mythic history, King Arthur sets a paradox. I answer hard acrostics, have a pretty taste of paradox. I quoted elegiacs or the crimes of Heliogabalus in chronics. I can floor peculiarities, parabolas. I can tell about Raphael's from Gerardo's and Zophanies. I know the croaking chorus from the frogs of Aristophanes. Then I can have a fugue which I've heard the music's dinner for. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore.
And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the air so that infernal nonsense pinafore.
Then I can write a washing bill in Babylonic cuneiform and tell you every detail of Caractacus's uniform. In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
In short, it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
In fact, when I know what is meant by Mamelon and Ravelin, when I can tell at sight a Mauser rifle from a javelin, when such affairs as sorties and surprises I'm more wary at, and when I know precisely what is meant by commissariat, when I have learned what progress has been made in modern gunnery, when I know more of tactics than a novice in a nunnery, in short, when I've a smattering of elemental strategy. You'll say a better Major General has ever sat at
You'll say a better Major General has never sat at You'll say a better Major General has never sat at You'll say a better Major General has never sat at
For my military knowledge, do I pluck in adventuring as enemy were down to the beginning of the century, but still it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern Major General.
But still it matters vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the very model of a modern Major General.
Well, there we have it, all those tongue twisters, all those indefinable terms, but happily we have a glossary at the back of the programme book, and everybody can mug up on all sorts of interesting information. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you to John and Yvonne on screen, and also thank you to Simon, Chloe and Lima off screen, and to Philippa for the live tweeting. The Pirates of Penzance opens on August the 3rd. The 2021 season opens June the 1st. We have been overwhelmed by the support of our Save Our Seats campaign so far. For those of you who have yet to see it, we're going to play you out with a trailer of some familiar faces from tonight and some of our wonderful crew and stage crew. Thank you very much and good night.
This year is OHP's Silver Jubilee.
Our beautiful new auditorium, designed by Takis,
seats a maximum of 400 people at each show.
This means that we will be operating at a 40% capacity for our 2021 season.
That includes The Marriage of Figaro,
La Traviata,
The Cunning Little Vixen,
L'Amico Fritz,
and The Pirates of Penzance.
So we need your help.
We're asking those of you who feel able to do so
to donate the cost of an extra ticket
for one of the 600 missing seats for the performances you plan to attend.
Your generosity will provide vital support in helping us continue our work this summer and beyond,
until we can get back to performing at full capacity.
To donate, visit the Opera Holland Park website at www.operahollandpark.com/SOS.